Hello, welcome to another episode of Stan the History Man. I'm your host, Dr. Stanley Sandler. Just get squared away here. Um, Today, I wanted to talk about Weimar Germany. Now, it's not all that unknown, but a lot of people wonder, what it is. You could say it's the German government before Hitler. Okay, and it comes at the end of World War One. Germany is defeated in World War One. Of course, most Germans say we weren't defeated. We were stabbed in the back by Jews, by communists, by vegetarians, whatever. But they were. And that's why they signed the armistice, because we'd have rolled right into Germany if they hadn't done that. But at any rate, the Kaiser had to abdicate, and a new government came in under Philip Scheidemann, and they made a deal. Germany was falling apart. There were communist insurrection. A number of cities like Munich were taken over and made like free people's republics, and several states like that. And then you had extreme right wingers saying we're stabbed in the back, we're going to take over, they're going to run this country right, we're going to attack the Allies and whatever. And so to stop it from falling apart, they made a deal. The army said to the new government, not the Kaiser anymore, if we will support you, we will put down all this insurrection. And there's even trouble on the border. The Poles were invading parts of Germany, and we will defend the Reich if you will allow us to put down these these left wingers. Right winger, that's okay, but not the left wingers. And that was the deal that was put out. Now, the Germany that emerged from all this moved from Berlin to Weimar, because Weimar, that's a nice little town. Beethoven was a resident of Weimar, so we'll forget all that Prussian militarism that caused World War One. And so you have basically a socialist government running the country, but not radical. And the army said, okay. However, things really start to go bad after a while, because see, the Allies demand reparations. All the mischief you guys did in France and Belgium, you got to pay for it. And the Germans say, well, look, we've exhausted everything with this war. So gradually inflation starts to really pick up. And the Allies at the same time are saying, look, pay your money, pay what you owe us. You signed that Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles dictated, and the Germans call it diktat, that we must pay these reparations, in addition to having no air force, no submarines, and only an army of 100,000 size. And so Germany is really in a quandary here. At least they say they were. I'm not so sure they were that badly off. And the Treaty of Versailles was such a diktat. I mean, you look at the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, what they did to Russia, took away the Ukraine, the Baltic countries there, all that went. Now, admittedly, they had to give it up again when Germany lost the war, and they made Russia pay really high indemnity in gold. Okay, not just bank credits or anything like that, in gold. And I've seen pictures of gold bars being shipped out of Russia on into Germany. So I don't want to hear this stuff about, oh, we're a diktat, this is terrible. They got off easy compared to what they did to Russia. The only thing that saved Russia, of course, was that the Germans lost the war. But at any rate, so the country sinks pretty much into economic turmoil, and inflation is a runaway inflation. And the French and the Brit and the Belgians say, if you don't pay up, we're going to take over the Rhineland, the Saar, with the industrial. I'm sorry, the Rhineland, which is the industrial heart of Germany, and they took it over. And they started mining the coal. Coal was everything. Was then the railroads, heating, everything was coal. So whoever got coal really had the country by the throat. And so they took over and just occupied. And of course, the Germans said you can't dig coal with bayonets, but the French and Belgians tried. You remember, Belgium was, of course, invaded by the beginning of the war, and the Belgians felt themselves very much agreed. They had done nothing to Germany, and that Germany invaded them for military reasons, And but the Germans said, look, you want money? We'll give you money. And they started to turn the printing presses. They say the only people who are really employed at a decent job in Germany are those who run the printing presses. They've turned out marks and marks and marks until this is like something you hear about in Zimbabwe, but this is Germany, in which a mark, I think, was about 100 million marks to the dollar. So any American living in Germany with money, like soldiers, we had soldiers just over in the borderlands of Germany, occupation troops, which that's another story which a lot of people don't know about. They made out like bandits. They were buying whole streets of houses. The value of the dollar was astronomical compared to the mark. But finally, I think the finance minister just dropped dead. It's just too much for him. And they said, look, we've got to stop this. We've got to make peace with the Allies, even though we hate them, what they're doing to us. But we got to stop this. Germany just fall apart. And so they got this finance minister, Horace Greeley Schott. You can tell by his name, he was born in America, named after Horace Greeley, the guy that said, "Go west, young man, and grow up with the country." But he grew up in Germany. And what he did, it's really remarkable. He put a mortgage on everything in Germany, houses, factories, railroad lines, everything, steel mills, all. They valued how much they were worth. What is the total value, the bank value of Germany? And we will issue marks now, new marks, based upon that value. Well, people say, look, Germany's a mess now, but still they have the railroad lines, they have the steel mills, they have the coal mines. So there obviously there's something backing up, not just the full faith and credit of the government. This is backed up by real value, the value of Germany, Weimar Germany. Oh, and I should say they did move. By about this time, they moved the capital, the government, to Weimar, and almost overnight, a great economist said, governments make inflation, governments can end inflation. Maybe a lesson for today. But it just overnight, pretty much Germany picked up by the bottom of the inflation was, or the height, if you will, was 1923, which is also the year that the Nazi Party tried to take over by force, and the so-called beer hall putsch in Germany, marched from the Bürgerbrau Keller down to downtown Germany to overthrow the government. Well, this is, remember, the deal between the government and the army? The army was there, and they shot about 16 Nazis were killed, and Hitler, the guy next to him, was killed, but unfortunately, he was yanked to the ground and wrenched his shoulder, but that was about all that happened to him. So now, see, this extreme right-wing nationalism like the Nazis, that's been put down. The army says, they put down the communists, all these free states and so on, they're done. And so Germany emerges now economically prosperous in the 1920s. It's their great prosperity. And something else I've noticed about the 1920s, I've never read about anywhere else, is that, they may have mentioned it here before, so bear with me, is that the 1920s was no war of any kind. Some tribal insurrection, the British go out and bomb them, and that would, like in Iraq, and that would end it. So at least Germany was not, the countries weren't faced with war anymore. And gradually it developed, things got better, prosperity, people are going to work again. And the inflation was terrible. It gutted the middle class. They had to, everything was based. They had to sell their heirlooms and treasures just to get enough money for bread. But now that was over, and politically now in foreign affairs, Germany, France, England signed the Rapallo Agreement. I'm sorry, the Locarno Agreement, which basically said we respect each other's borders. Now, we're not entirely happy with ours, but we will not go to war to change borders. Just before that, actually, in 1920, Germany had signed with Soviet Russia the Treaty of Rapallo, saying basically the same thing. And then they started to work behind the scenes in Russia, training air forces, and they're learning all about aviation and so on from the Russians. The two were both pariah nations in 1920. Russia, the Bolsheviks, terrible. The Germany falling apart. They worked together because Germany's not supposed to have an air force, but they have a black air force over at Lipetsk in Russia, being trained by Soviet airmen and how to, the latest in aviation and so on. So, but anyway, this is a period of peace and prosperity. Now, if you've ever seen the movie Cabaret, that shows the febrile, extravagant, luxurious Berlin of that time, and any vice you can think of, it was on display. I mean, literally on display in Berlin. But that, of course, most Germans weren't living like that, just like most Americans weren't making whoopee in speakeasies in the 1920s. Oh, people, the leaders of society, in many cases, certainly were. But so you have this period of prosperity, and a lot of it, though, is based on American loans. You're saying, well, look, Germany's prosperous now. We'll loan the money. Germans need the money, and they'll pay it back in a certain amount of time. But what happened was that one of the things happened was the unexpected death of Foreign Minister Stresemann. He was a force for the French trusted him, and the English trusted him. We can work, with Germany. In fact, the English felt they were getting more annoyed with France for its saying, well, we got to defend ourselves against Germany. They're saying, it's all over now. We got to make peace and love. And but he died. Stresemann died unexpectedly. And then, of course, what changed everything and turned the peaceful 20s into the dirty 30s was a stock market crash. And then the brokers on Wall Street said to Germany, we want our money now. You borrowed us, you got to pay it back with interest. The Germans said, we can't. But Wall Street basically demanded it. Matter of fact, ex-president Calvin Coolidge said they hired the money, didn't they? So they're saying, look, you're going to wreck us. Give us extension, that sort of thing. But that didn't really happen. And so Germany is plunged into the Depression, which was fully as bad in Germany as it was in the United States. And so that is the background. The Weimar Republic continues on the series of crises, economic crises, of course, the Depression, and one government after one political government after another. And increasingly, the Nazis were getting powerful. People saying, think what the Germans that generation went through. World War One, about 2 million dead, then period of chaotic and great inflation, then catch your breath during the 20s, and then the Great Depression. And so you have, but not just the growth of the Nazi Party, the Communist Party. The Communist Party of Germany was second only to the party of the Soviet Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And I would maintain there are probably more people freely joining the Communist Party in Germany, making it a bigger, volunteer party than in Russia, where you join the party to basically get ahead. And some did believe in communism, but basically to get ahead. But in Germany, second largest communist party in the world. Okay. And then you have the Nazis growing increasingly during the 20s, the late 20s especially. They were down like 3% of the population, but now it grows at 10%, 20%, 30% of the population. Now you have militia armed thugs from both the Communist Party in the red shirts and the Nazi Party in the black shirts fighting it out. And of course, it often be other right-wing groups like the Stahlhelm, which was a veterans group, also duking it out in the streets of Berlin and other major cities. Sometimes, actually, the communists got together with the Nazis, like a transit strike, just shut down all transportation in Berlin. Everybody in Berlin then took the subway or the trolley car. They had cars in Germany, of course, but nothing like, actually, France had the highest per capita ownership of automobiles at that time. But anyway, so the country is really splitting, okay, and maybe not falling apart, but splitting, and of course suffering under this Great Depression. I just wonder what they lived through. I mean, it's no wonder people said this is just ridiculous. We can't go on like this, and that's exactly what the Nazis and the communists said. And then there was a deal made that the right wing, especially the big, like Thyssen and Krupp, could get together with Hitler and say, look, we're really afraid of these communists. And the other parties, the Socialist Party and so on, don't seem to have the power to stop the communists. So we'll work with you. And so they did. And in 1933, the 1933 elections, the Nazis did not win a majority. They got a plurality. And that's important because, even most people think, well, the Nazis must have shot their way into power. Nazis. Well, and even the head of the American Historical Association, who should have known better, said, yeah, when the Nazis forced their way into power. No, they came into power legally. In other words, Hindenburg, the president, called upon Hindenburg, named after the dirigible. No, it's the other way around. Called Hitler to be the prime minister. But he was not the leader. The party did not have a majority in the Reichstag. But once Hitler got into power, of course, things began to change. And the last relatively free election in 1932, the German people gave the Nazis a solid majority. Of course, that election was not entirely fair. By that time, lots of people were beaten up and that type of thing. They were killed even to see to it that the Nazis got. And then that was the last election of any kind in Germany. Now they were united under the Fuhrer. But I tell you, Weimar, there's some positive points about Weimar. One of the things is Hitler talks about, and understandably, that you got out of the Depression. People went to work building the Autobahn, which was actually started by Mussolini in the 20s, the Autostrada. And actually, the Weimar Republic was building roads, too, to put unemployed people to work. Because there was unemployment in the 20s, even though the country was prosperous. So he then putting people to work. The other thing, the difference that he was putting them to work with armaments, building up Germany, because the Nazis from the start, this is what they were based on. They didn't win a lot of votes by anti-Semitism. Oh, that Nazis hate the Jews. That's true enough. But they hated, the gut hatred was Versailles. They have humiliated this great nation, and we're going to do something about it. And that's what got the popular German vote. We're not going to put up with this anymore. And so the first thing they did to put their finger in the eye of the Treaty of Versailles was to say, we're going to have an air force. And in a sense, this was window dressing because there wasn't much of an air force, but they started to have an air force, and much of it based upon what they learned in the Soviet Union. And the Allies in the League of Nations did say that there's a violation, outright violation of the Treaty of Versailles. You were to have no air force. Well, we're building one right now. And later on, they started to build submarines. And then after that, they started conscription because they figured the great Germany, a nation of tens of millions of people, can't be satisfied with an army of 100,000. And so they appealed to German nationalism. Our mighty nation, our mighty Reich has been humiliated. We weren't defeated in battle. That's the standard Nazi line. And I think a lot of Germans believe that too. And probably looking back, we should have invaded, continue with the invade and go beyond northern France and Belgium, just go right into Germany itself, not just have small bridgeheads on the line, which we had. Of course, we learned, that's one lesson from history we learned. World War II, no question about Germany was defeated because we were there and hanged their leaders and said, okay, you guys have lost. But that was I think now anti-Semitism is always a part of the Nazi program, but they got the most traction, the most votes for poor Germany. Oh, the Germans can really get into something like poor Germany, where we've been so badly treated, ignoring, of course, what they did to other people. I mean, they called the rape of Belgium. They think, well, World War I, the Germans weren't Nazis, and that's a good thing in a way, but they still destroyed so much of northern Belgium and northern France, and you can see why the Allies were really mad at him and said, "Yeah, we want reparations for this." But poor Germany, that one had the most. German anti-Semitism, it was there in a sense like anti-Semitism in America. That they have maybe undue influence and so on, but we want to kill them. And the Nazis at first didn't say that. We just want to cut. They got too much power in Germany. We're going to cut it down. And the Weimar Republic had some Jewish leaders. One of the most brilliant was a guy called, can't think of his name. He was the economic genius in World War I and really mobilized Germany, but he was assassinated by extreme right wingers. But at any rate, one thing I wanted to say about the Weimar Republic, Hitler would say, I brought you out of the Depression, and we're now rearming Germany. We're strong. Actually, their living standards are higher, not by an awful lot, but it was higher in Weimar Germany than it was in Nazi Germany, because the Nazis are always demanding contributions, and all these groups you had to join, like the Hitler Youth, you had to pay, membership dues and so on, and collection, Winterhilfe, that was always, they were always around asking for that. So actually, if you take all these deductions out, and the taxes were fairly high to pay for all this, they actually had more disposable income in Weimar Germany than they had in Nazi Germany. Now, of course, but I'm saying they don't compare. The Nazis didn't compare their standard of living to Weimar. They compared it to the Depression. Well, anything is good compared to the Depression, but that was a little bit of financial juggling that was going on there. So, I mean, the Weimar Germany actually has some positive achievements. I said they got out of that terrible inflation. They put the country on a sound, solid financial basis, and but the thing is, it was born in defeat. The government, after we lost, were stabbed in the back and lost the war. Then Weimar comes in. It's not even in Berlin, so you call it a German government. And these are all the things that the Nazis built upon. But I think, as I say, the Weimar Republic deserves a little more respect and a little better knowledge in history. Well, thank you very much for listening to Stan the History Man, and I'll talk to you again very soon. Bye.